Hi everyone, and welcome to ReThink HR, why investing effort in system optimization to solve your HR software problems. I'm Catherine, I'm head of content here at Ciphr. Joining me is Philippa, who's the director at ReThink HR. Hi Philippa, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Catherine. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Do you mind sharing about your role at ReThink and your background with HR systems?
ReThink HR is a specialist consultancy. We focus exclusively on HR technology, and so our team is working with our clients to select, implement and optimize their HR systems. So that's what we're talking about today, is really focusing on how we can develop systems once they're in place and really make sure we get the most of them. So my background's generalist HR, but then moved into the technology space, and we're really pleased that we've now been able to specialise in this area. It's something that our team really enjoy working in, so it's a pleasure to be here today to talk about system optimisation.
Fantastic, thanks so much. And also joining us is Paige, who's a customer transformation consultant here at Ciphr. Hi Paige, how are you?
Hi, good morning everyone, how are you?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what a customer transformation consultant does?
Absolutely, yeah. So customer transformation consultant here at Ciphr. Previously started in the implementation space, so working with customers right at the start of the journey, then getting involved in sort of the system optimization and kind of business as usual. Customer transformation consultant at Ciphr really looks at how can you get the best out of your system. So I work with a variety of customers kind of at different points in their journey with Ciphr and look at ways of optimizing.
Fantastic, thanks so much. So loads of experience on the call today. So whether you're an existing customer and want to know about how to optimize your existing setup, or whether you're using another provider and thinking about whether optimization or switching might be right for you, hopefully we've got the expertise to get you covered today. So I'm going to start us off on today's agenda. I'm going to share a little bit about Ciphr in case you're new to us. And then I'll hand over to Philippa, who'll talk about the challenges that optimization might be able to help you with and how to go about successfully optimizing your HR system. And then Paige will share about how that optimization process works here with us and our customers. Please say hi and say hello in the chat and share your comments and any thoughts in there. You can also send in your questions using the Q&A option. This webinar is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to you afterwards. So if you miss anything or want to share it with a colleague, don't worry, you can do that and we'll get that to you via email. So a little bit about Ciphr. We're a people management solutions provider, but really that kind of barely touches the surface. There's loads of things that our software and services can help organizations with across the employee lifecycle, ranging from recruitment and onboarding through to central HR, payroll software and payroll bureau, as well as benefits, e-learning, LMS, and D&I consultancy. We're trusted by more than 600 clients across the UK, and many of our team are experts themselves and former customers. So we really know what helps and what hinders you when it comes to working with HR and payroll systems. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Philippa, and I'll be back at the end for the Q&A.
Brilliant, thanks, Catherine. So obviously there's lots of different reasons where we might want to might find ourselves in a situation where our HR system isn't where we want it to be. It might be that we've joined a new organisation and come in and trying to understand what the existing HR system is being used for, or you could be in post for a while and find that things haven't moved on with the HR system. You've had it in place for a while and things haven't developed. So there's a few different use cases for why you might want to look at optimization. So I'm just going to talk through those just now. So the first one is when you want to build on your implementation success. Phase one of an implementation, for anyone who's been through it, will know that it's a busy time. There's a lot to do. You're moving from spreadsheets or from a previous system onto your new one. And you're really focused on getting the system up and running. If it's HR, you want data. If it's payroll, you really need to get paying people and to get off your legacy systems. So that's really the focus. It's minimum viable product. And so what we're doing is making sure that we are focused on that. That's what, the goal is. Just get this thing working. Let's overcome all the issues. And there's a lot to do in that time. A lot of the time we might be finding that there are other things that we want to develop in the system that come up but they're just not the priority at the time. So they get put on a list and they get put to one side. And then really it's just about wanting to, once you're live, you can take a pause, maybe plan to take a pause. Say, right, we'll have a couple of months. Let's just let the system embed. We've rolled it out with our teams. Everybody's using it. Let's just let it settle. Everyone get used to it. But it's really important, I think, to plan to have a phase 2 of your implementation where you can come back to the functionality that you want to be able to use, anything that you weren't able to get to in phase 1. And you'll also be getting feedback from teams within the business to be able to say, could it do this? Could it do that? And I think if you can keep that momentum going, then that's a really great thing to be able to do and to continue to get the return on investment in the product that you've bought. So, if you're doing check-ins, you can look at doing your annual appraisal process if you have one of those, or that you've got a pay review process coming up. You can look at designing the pay review process so that the system can support that as far as possible, whether you can run it completely in the system or whether you use the data in a really neat way to be able to get the updates made that you need to. Ultimately, it's all about getting that, continuing to build on how much you can use the system, the value you can get out of it. The other time we find people frustrated with their system is when their organisation's expectations have changed. The system goes in, it gets embedded, everything's working fine, but something changes suddenly, maybe with an acquisition or over a period of time. That means we need more from the system. This often happens with significant growth or even with legislation changes that we see come in. But there's also an element about employee expectations. I think we've seen this recently around capturing things like gender identity, chosen pronouns. I know a lot of my clients have added those fields to their systems where they weren't in place before because they want to be able to capture that information. The employees expect that information to be available and to be utilised in the right way. And I think it's really important as well that we can see these from a strategic point of view. We want to be leading from the front and to be able to have the information that our organisation expects us to have. And what's really great is that you can get that information via your HR system, especially if you've got employee self-service. And you really want to make sure that the data that you have in the system, that you're capturing, that you're updating, is fit for what the organisation needs now. If it doesn't adapt, then you can find that the credibility of the system and ultimately of the HR team can become undermined. And you can also find that there's lots more manual work because you're having to do things off the system, which potentially could be done in the system. And nobody wants to be prioritising manual work. Another time you might want to look at the system is when you want to develop and innovate. It's really important that we can continue to capture the data that we need for our organisations to be able to move forward into the future. If we're not changing, then we're not making sure we're surviving for the future. So we need to make sure that we've got the data that we need. We might find that we want to enhance the data that we're holding, or we might want to capture completely new data that gives us the intelligence for those strategic decisions. What's brilliant about an HR system, especially as long as you've got employee self-service, which every system has these days to some extent, is that you can roll that out. You can roll out this data request to everybody really quickly and easily. It's very quick for people to be able to put that information in. And so with minimal effort, you get the information that you need and you can start working with it. And all of that information is also then feeding into your strategic decision-making processes. I think with that as well, you can start to look at things that perhaps you don't have information on at the moment. Could you start assessing flight risk? Have you got enough data in your system to be able to look at trends amongst leavers and then be able to look at your current employees and whether there are any that you're particularly concerned about? Are you losing people in certain demographics? And is there anything you can do about that? Have you got the right gender and age balance? If your organisation has got lots of people who are getting close to retirement age, for example, have you got the people coming up behind them that you're training to be able to take up those positions in the future? It can really help with planning career paths, training, all of those kinds of things that also help with engagement for employees. One of the major things I find when my clients are frustrated with their system is when they've lost the knowledge about the system, and for whatever reason. Often it's the case that the team that did the actual implementation have left, and there hasn't been a sufficient transfer of knowledge to the people who've replaced them. And that can make it really difficult because the system stays static, it doesn't develop, and it can really, if people don't understand what's possible in the system, then they don't explore it. Potentially they accept, oh, this is what the system does, it only works in this way, it's not exactly what we want, but we'll live with it, until the point where they feel they can't live with it. But really what you can do by having a review of the system is to be able to look at what can be adapted, what can be changed, where can you adjust processes, workflows, data points, reports, to be able to enhance the way that you're using the system. And are there modules which were, going back to the point about phase 1 and phase 2 of implementation, were there modules that were implemented to the minimum that was needed to get them live, but they have more functionality which isn't being utilised? Or worse, are there actually modules that you're paying for as part of your system that have never been configured and never utilised, which, you know, nobody wants to be wasting money paying for modules that they haven't utilised, especially if it's functionality that might be helpful. So it's really useful to be able to get into understanding the system, understanding what is possible, and being able to then move forward and decide what you want to do with that information. I think it's also really important to remember that every system vendor is constantly innovating, and 12 months is a really long time in a system software business. So what you'll find is that lots of things can move forward significantly in 12 months. So even if you think you understand what your product is capable of, sometimes you find that it's actually got more functionality than you've got access to. So it's really important to make sure that we're really understanding what's on the roadmap, because then that will really help us to keep up to date with what's possible and start planning for the future, and to, again, make sure that we're always at the front of the innovations that the system has available for us. And so I've just got some initial thoughts on how to successfully optimise your HR system before I hand over to Paige. So one of the most important things is to be able to set yourself and your team some optimization objectives. I've always encouraged my clients, as I finish, we tend to finish on projects after implementation, but I always make sure I leave them with the list of things that they have decided that they couldn't work on in that implementation phase, and to really encourage them to say, yes, absolutely, it's launched, that's great, let's have a couple of months, let's focus on some other things, but then let's definitely plan to come back to this and look at what we want to do to be able to continue to develop that optimization journey. There's always more that can be done in terms of efficiency, automation, user experience, personalization. So there's lots of things that you can focus on and build out a plan, and some things that are important for the team strategically, but that can also just make the system nicer and more engaging to use. You can also find that other areas within the business, like maybe finance or operations, have improved their systems as well. And so you can tag team with that to say, well, they were in a different place 12 months ago, they've now moved forward. Let's see what else we can bring with the HR system now. What is possible now that wasn't possible before? It's really important to engage with your system vendor, so your customer success manager or customer account manager, who's going to be able to talk to you about what is possible within the system and make sure you really understand what the system is capable of. And that you can see that every system has a product roadmap. You can see what's coming in the future and to be able to look at that. You know, I'd say I would be suggesting an annual review of your system's usage, to be getting feedback from the team, feedback from wider teams and other stakeholders about what they're looking for in the system, to make sure that you can keep up with their expectations. And that might be needed more often if the business is moving quickly, and if things are changing quite dramatically, then to be able to keep ahead of that. We all know that there's a lag time between having the idea and having it implemented in the system. It's the same time it takes to do the configuration and the rollout. So you want to make sure that you're always as close to having it ready when you need it as you can. it's always really helpful to engage the wider team outside of HR to evolve how they're using the HR system. They may not know that it could schedule reports for them and deliver data to them. They may not know that the dashboard they see can be configured. So it's helpful to be able to talk to them about what would be useful for them and educate them about what's possible as well, which will also steer the developments of things that add value for the business. We always talk about the return on investment of projects. It's something that you can measure it tangibly, but there's also the intangible benefits of having a system that's easier to work with. But it's really important to measure and then re-measure the return on investment over time. As you optimize the system, as it embeds into the organization, or as you make changes over time, then the obvious intention is that return on investment will improve and increase over time. So it's really helpful. It's interesting for the HR team, but it really demonstrates the value that the system is adding as well. And then also it's really important to celebrate success. It's often tricky to do that in busy days, but we want to be able to make sure that we are looking back and saying, well, this is how far we've come. Yes, there's always more to do. But it's always really exciting for the team to be able to say, actually, this is what we've achieved over this period of time. We have achieved the objectives we set at the beginning of this period, and now let's set some more and go again. And I think as you go through, so it's really important to document the needs that you have, kind of looking at your objectives, looking at future objectives, if you're able to capture those, and then you can start exploring those with the business and with the vendor to make sure that you've got all of those needs captured and you can plan for when they might be able to be met. And there's lots of different ways that you can supplement your HR system. So there are lots of add-ons that you can add, obviously things like Power BI, but other tools that you can use that can expand the functionality that your core HR system has, without having to significantly change things, but you can increase the amount of data or the ways that you're using that data. And then I think finally, it's really about building a business case for investment, if cash investment is going to be needed or significant time investment. I think it's people think, oh, I'll get a new system, but there's such a lot of cost that goes into the selection, the implementation. I think it's really worth weighing up the alternative option of investment in your existing platform. If you find that that there are things that it can improve. Some things might not take very long and they could be done by the HR team. Sometimes when it's more of building out new modules or adding functionality, there is a cash investment that needs to be made as well. But I really think that there's often a lot of value that can be achieved from doing that as an alternative to considering changing system. And so with that, hopefully I've covered some of the different reasons you might want to look at the optimization and some of initial ideas about how to go about that. So I'll hand over to Paige.
So much, Philippa, that was really helpful. So from Ciphr's side then, how we support customers with system optimizations. So with our system optimizations, we actually include a system optimization if one of our customers have what we call a CSP, customer service pack, or they can also be discussed to be offered kind of separately to that if you haven't got a service pack with Ciphr. So it's worth exploring if you're with a different vendor, what they offer. So with our system optimizations, we start with attraction. So you'll have a half day with a consultant where they will look at your system with you and go through from attraction right the way through retention through to offboarding. Often we find there are maybe, as Philippa mentioned, there will be modules or tools that we can demonstrate and discuss that will make life a bit easier. There may be a case that there are modules that potentially implementation you didn't adopt at the time. And actually now you're at a point where that would be really useful. It would save time. And it's something that the business is sort of at that stage where they are requiring that tool. We do also like to discuss with you different systems that you are using outside of Ciphr, whether there are different tools. Is there a spreadsheet that you're using? Is there another system that you're using for a different reason that we can either adopt into Ciphr, or could we look into integrations, APIs, different elements like that that will really save you and your team a lot of time. We do recommend that these are done annually, as Philippa said. It's a great conversation to have, but it's also a great conversation to continue having. So having these annually, what can happen is your consultant can look at your report and say, okay, this is what happened last year. This is where you were at as a business, where your system was at the time. What's changed? What's the new strategy? What's the new goal as the business? And what can we do to kind of aid and support that going further? So like I say, we go through the whole system, and we will discuss if you've got any other modules. It's not just necessarily the HR focus. If we can discuss with you payroll, iRecruit, that kind of thing, we'll discuss what you're using, how you're using it, and where there could be improvements, and whether there needs to be recommendations for, follow-on sessions. Little tagline for you. So make the most of your time with your consultant. This is a chance to reimagine your system and bring back that day one feeling. So all of our consultants are experts in the system and also in the industry. We are mostly all HR experts in our own right and have worked in that world. We love that implementation feeling when you have a brand new customer who is excited, ready to go, has got that drive for their system, and is kind of at that day one point. Ideas are flowing, and sometimes that day one feeling gets lost. All of the great ideas and out of the box thinking that happens kind of in those early stages. As you get through a 12-month period, you're trying to implement a new system, you've got the day-to-day happening, that feeling can be lost. This call is a really great opportunity to bring back and reimagine your system. And what's really great is you'll have a report to back that up from your consultant. So if you've had any great ideas or things that you think, actually, I would really like to do that in the future, or I'd really like to use the system in this way, we will document that idea for you and put that as a note, as an action, as a suggestion for the future. So that's a really nice way of just making sure you get that, as I said, that day one feeling back with your system. And it's also really useful as well, actually, if you weren't part of that implementation, it's a great way then to get that drive and feeling for your system. So help us to help you. So we do ask that you prepare for such a session. I've got some kind of tips on things that I would recommend you look into. So potentially there might be some pages that you have never looked at. You might even have them hidden in your system. So it's really worthwhile having a look at your system just from the beginning with a fresh pair of eyes. Is there an area that kind of piques your interest? You think, actually, I don't know what that is. You can look at our Ciphr Academy to get an idea and also explore, is there a process here? Is there a guide that will help me set it up myself? Or is this something I would like to bring up when I'm on the call with a consultant? We also recommend that you think about different people within your organisation. So do you have bank staff or volunteers that you're managing manually? Have a think about what other elements you are tracking about your employees or your workforce that isn't currently in the system, and why is it not currently in the system? Potentially we might be able to explore those and look at your system setup to see if we can also include those into your system. Now, as we all know, with a system, there are always going to be pain points, whether it's with the system or with the process internally. So we recommend just making a note of what are those pain points. It's our job to kind of look at, okay, this is what's causing you pain or taking you time at the moment. How can we improve things? Is there some, easy config change that we can make? Is there a simple notification or reminder that can kind of drive that efficiency? In some cases, there might even be an additional module, and it might be a case of, okay, we need to look at arranging a demo for you to look at another element of the system you're not using. So there are lots of different tools that we can pull on to have a look at those. It might also be a case of upskilling and training. So sometimes, like I said, we will go onto these calls with customers who were not part of that implementation journey, don't have a lot of experience with the system. And actually those sometimes are the brilliant calls, because we can really get people understanding what can your system do, what are the possibilities. And that's also a great way of then picking up on, okay, we've got some great training guides or learning journeys that we really recommend you look at. And that can also be a great way of just getting more from your system. Another recommendation is to think about people outside of the HR team. So often it's a good idea to speak to management teams, other system users, just to have a look at Are they doing anything outside of the system at the moment? Or they're using part of the system, maybe they're using a report and then a spreadsheet separately. Why are they doing that and what is the purpose? Often a real common one we see is appraisals. Appraisals, often managers might have their own appraisal form where they're doing it externally, internally, and there might be a really valid reason for it happening in both elements, but we want to understand why and how we can make that streamlined and have it in one place. It just saves you having to pull data from multiple areas. Finally, this is probably, I would say, the most common point to think about is where are you duplicating your data? Often we speak to customers and they'll say we've got this data in the system, but then we've also got it externally because manager X isn't allowed to see this data within the system because of potentially it might be a certain field, potentially in sort of job and pay screens within a system. It might be a case of a manager can't see salary, so customers just hidden that kind of screen from the manager. It's worthwhile finding out where are these duplications, because often it can maybe be resolved by looking at your security, looking at where you're holding your data and why. Is there a more suitable area in the system that it could move to? And what is that? Often it's spreadsheets, but what is that spreadsheet serving? Is it just a data dump of what's already in the system? Could we get that automatically generated out of the system on a monthly basis to save someone having to maintain effectively two lots of data? So the benefits of a system optimization. So I actually spoke to our implementation team at Ciphr, our professional services, and asked, what would you say are the top 5? These were repeated multiple times. I think these are definitely our top 5 for Ciphr. So it's a great opportunity to see and understand functionality that you didn't already have. So it's, as Philippa said, you may park different elements of your implementation. That might be due to priorities at the time. It might be that there's a change in strategy, the needs of the business change. You have an influx of new starters, and therefore actually the capacity you had to manage quite a manual onboarding process is no longer manageable as a HR team. There might be new functionality that you've missed. So we send out release notes and we put different information on our Ciphr Academy, but it's a great chance at Ciphr to see, are there any improvements? Have we made any changes that maybe originally you decided that functionality wasn't for you because of whatever reason? That may now have actually changed and it might become more relevant to you. Point 2, so you can get an insight into process improvements and how to get more from your system. So it's a chance to explore what your processes are, and if we have any new ways of working in the system to maybe streamline and get more efficiencies from your system. So as consultants, we work with multiple different customers from different industries, and sometimes through those discussions, even we might get, actually, that's we've got a really great idea or a new way of working that we maybe haven't explored before. It's a great chance for our consultants to talk to you about best practice. And like I say, talk about how are other customers utilising an area and offer different sort of innovative ideas. Point 3 then, it's a chance to talk about future growth plans and changes in the organisation. So as I mentioned in point 1, there may be a time where the strategy changes, and these will often have an effect on the setup or the future ways of working within your system. We might be able to offer best way of actioning that change. And we also might be in a position to discuss with you how actually Ciphr can support you making that change. So if you've maybe, you've gone through an acquisition as an example, and you've got a big 2P job on your hands, you've got to bring in lots of other data and your configuration's going to change, potentially we might be able to support as a provider on how is the best practice to make that change, but also we might be able to physically help and take some of that strain from your team. Point 4, so you're speaking to system experts, so the best person to answer your questions. We always encourage that if you have issues and questions to obviously raise a ticket with our customer care team. But if you feel actually I've got a really quick question that I would like to just wait and explore in more depth with a consultant, please bring that to your session. We do have set agendas, but your consultant is there and wants to support you. If we think it would be quicker through our customer care team and they've got the right support there, great. But if you think actually there's something I really like to go into more detail with, do bring that with you. It's your chance to speak with a system expert, to definitely make the most of that. Like I said, we do have an agenda, but if you raise at the start, you've got a couple of specific questions, we will always do our best to make time to discuss those. And potentially they might come up naturally as we go through your employee life cycle. And finally, it's a great opportunity for training new team members. So as I said right at the very start, often we do have the luxury that actually the team that implemented are sometimes there and part of system optimizations, but also quite a lot of the time they have moved on or they're in different roles in the organisation and they've stepped away from the system. So this can be a really great way of us being able to let new team members of what have you purchased, what's included, what are you not using, what could you be using, and the best ways of training and becoming a system expert. And that's the end for me. I think we're on to questions.
Yes, that's right. Thanks, Paige. Philippa, if you could come back to us, that would be great. Thanks both. I've learned loads about some of the trigger points for system optimization checks and also the benefits of carrying that out, particularly from a customer perspective. So if there's anyone on the broadcast that has questions, please send them in using the chat or the Q&A area, and we'll get to those in a moment. I see there's quite a lot of customers on the line. So if you have specific questions, this is a great time to talk to Paige about it, about how that system optimization process works. It was really interesting, Paige, you were saying there that the optimization checks are a good point to review functionality that you've purchased but not implemented or maybe aren't using fully. Is that quite common for our customers?
Definitely. I would say it's become more and more common as HR teams, as a lot of people know, get involved in anything and everything. It is not just a people function anymore. And I would say that when we speak to customers, they are so knee deep in the day-to-day whilst trying to bring a new system that actually there are areas that just aren't important at the time. And they often, once they get comfortable with the system and kind of that implementation period has ended, then it's a great time to revisit.
And then obviously, like spending money on something but not using it, that impacts your long-term ROI figures.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's one of those things where we try and make customers aware from the start, you're not going to use this. We've got the content in Academy and we really encourage people to revisit, look through Academy, join webinars such as this. Especially with Ciphr, we do great webinars that will remind you of maybe different areas, or we do Ask the Expert sessions on our Academy area. Remind yourself of what maybe you aren't using and would be of an interest so that you are getting the most out of effectively what you're paying for.
Exactly. Philippa, is that something that you see commonly with clients that you work with as well, with other systems?
Absolutely. I think it's common across all systems, as Paige just does reference. It's phase one is just get the product in, get it working. And then if you don't actively manage the optimization after that, it can fall away. And so I see it all the time. You get the development path is there during implementation because you have a whole list of things. You're like, it would be great if we could do this. It would be great if we could do that. A manager comes and says, can I have this very complicated set of data? And we're like, we're just trying to get our head count straight at the moment, and maybe some departments and cost centers, because that's not been, completely clear before. Yes, absolutely. What you want is completely, understandable. We want the same thing, but we're just not ready for it yet. But by going out and engaging, keeping that list and going out and engaging the business to be able to continue to develop that, I think it also shows and educates the wider teams that the system can work for them. They don't just have to accept it as it is. Hopefully it's doing a lot of what they need, but if there is something that would be valuable for them, they can come and say, well, it would be really helpful if this, if that, if the system could support me with this process. And often it's there, or it's possible in some way that the system can be supporting that. And so and often that does come to, well, can it send a survey, or can I run a more detailed appraisal process in the system? It's like, actually, yes, you can. Let's work on that and develop it. So you can always be improving the return on investment that you've made in the system.
I think what's tricky with HR systems is that although they're used by everybody, whether you're an employee, a line manager, or a HR user, they are regarded as HR systems, not as company-wide systems, in the way that some other systems you may use internally are viewed as company-wide. Does that sort of sense of primary ownership sitting with HR and a lack of ownership from other departments, does that get in the way of using the software to its fullest?
I think it probably does, yeah, because people are maybe they've got experience of just being given software. It's like, here's your HR software, it does this. They're not expecting to be able to engage with the development of that. So I think it is for HR teams to proactively say that we can make this work better for all of us. Let's talk about the ideas that we have collectively of how we can work it together. I think that view is perhaps changing with some of the engagement functionality that's in HR systems that everybody's working on, to be able to make it so it's less of somewhere you go to update your address and book your holiday, and something that's more useful. So obviously where you can have, like you can have in Ciphr, like you can have all the different modules that you could, means that things like LMS, you're going to the same place. So there's more reason to go into the HR system. You can build out the engagement side through there. So I think that means that if you can make it more of a wider business tool, but I do think it's a conscious effort from where we are now.
Yeah, certainly. So we talked about the benefit of having annual system optimizations and maybe a change in staff as being one trigger. Are there any other triggers that you could identify as maybe what might prompt someone from thinking this might be a good idea to actually, I want to get this booked in?
I would just say annually is our absolute recommendation. I would say for anybody with a system is to review. There are some customers though actually that see a benefit of doing it more frequently. If they are going through a period of change in the organisation and things are constantly changing, they're, often if they've got lots of acquisitions, the workforce is changing, growing, that is a really good time to keep focusing on, okay, what are our processes? It might be that those sessions become a bit shorter if you are having them more than annually. I've got one customer who did actually have them quarterly at a point, and that was because they were going through masses of change, some of it within the business, but also some of it within the HR team. That meant actually they just needed to constantly be having those discussions about processes. What is the process for onboarding right through to offboarding? And that just really supports them through that big time of change. That would be another, great time, I would say, to get that booked in, is if you are going through a lot of change, get that call booked in so you've got some support.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with everything you've just said, Paige. I think the only other time where I'd really encourage it is if someone's coming into a business and finding a system in situ that they don't have enough information about, or they can get some information from their team, but perhaps the team isn't, as engaged with it, or, the new person has a real focus on tech. And I think that is incredibly important that we are moving in that direction and bringing our teams with us. But I think it's a great opportunity to have the conversation with somebody within your vendor who is really knowledgeable about what you've got, what you haven't got, what is possible. I've done reviews with Paige with clients of mine that are using Ciphr, and it's really helpful to be able to understand the art of the possible, and then to be able to take that forward and make a plan for how you want to develop your system usage.
And Philippa, you work with a lot of clients who are in the market for choosing new HR software. How common is it for people who are thinking about entering a selection process to actually validate and optimize their existing system before making that decision to go out to market? I
think it's probably not as common as it should be. It's always our first step in that conversation, is to understand, okay, so you're coming to me saying you want a new HR platform. What are the reasons? And have you actually dug into what you're missing, what development needs you think you have that your current system isn't meeting? Have you had the conversations with the vendor about what is and isn't possible? It's fundamentally going to be more cost effective to optimize your existing system if you can get it to where you need it to be. And I think with the development that's happening with all vendors continuously, there's every chance you can meet a lot of your needs with your existing vendor, especially if your system usage has been quite static for a period of time. Things will have changed dramatically. And I think you can look at optimizing that first. Sometimes you do get to the point, okay, what your current vendor just fundamentally doesn't do what, doesn't have some functionality that you have decided is strategically important. And but we really want to get to that point before we start looking at another system. It's not a process to go into lightly, selection and implementation of a new system. And like I say, when you can combine what you're already doing, the functionality your system likely has, and then different ways that you can optimize it, potentially with add-ons or with adding functionality from a third-party system, which fills the gap that you've identified. There's not necessarily the reason to actually want to go ahead and try and build a business case for making such a fundamental change for the organization. It's ever more difficult to get those business cases approved. Certainly seeing it that there's more stakeholders involved, there's more sign-off steps to get budget for capital expenditure. So you can achieve what you might want to achieve often with the optimization of your existing system.
Okay, sure. And I think, Paige, if a Cipher client comes to us and says, we're thinking about going back to market, it would be one of our first suggestions is to get stuck into some optimization, digging out those requirements and gaps.
Absolutely. And, we've got great account development managers here at Cipher who will also offer sort of deep dives and look at the system as if you were a new customer. And often that can be really helpful to kind of look at the system as if you were going into kind of maybe a tender process and look at it with a fresh pair of eyes without your data in to see the art of the possible. Going back on sort of what Philippa said there, the cost and also the time cost of implementing a new system is incredible. And I think it's really beneficial to have that discussion with your vendor first, just to see actually what is possible, what's not possible, where are you going as a business. Definitely at Cipher, we are really open at let's talk about our roadmap. What are our plans for the future? So it can be a real great time saver and financial saver as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember there is no unicorn system. Unfortunately, we have to open every section, every conversation with clients with there is no system that does everything exactly the way that you want to do it. There's going to have to be a compromise somewhere. So it's good to understand the compromises that you're making, but you can't expect that there will be no compromise in any system project, whether it's an implementation or an optimization. As long as you understand what those compromises are and how you're willing to work with them, then that's the most important thing.
Definitely. And I know I've worked with customers where they've, like you said, Philippa, they've adopted a system. They've kind of just been handed this system and they might find that maybe data's wrong or their predecessor maybe didn't understand the system as well as they thought they did. And there might actually be fundamental errors in the data and the configuration throughout the time of them having the system. And you're that person that's come in and adopted it. That is, again, a really great time to kind of say, we've got problems. The system optimization will help us highlight if we think there are fundamental issues in the way things have been set up, or if there have been changes to your system or the data is incorrect. And then we can start that conversation and rather have a brand new system and start fresh, where you will eventually just take the incorrect data across to a new system. Let's look at cleaning up the data. So that's also another great, bit of a spring clean in your system is always needed.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to sort of almost being a bit honest with yourself about your system usage and any areas where there is room for improvement, and maybe even thinking about, as you think about setting your own personal objectives, what are the objectives for the system? Are they on track? Are you meeting those? Because quite often there are objectives tied to implementation, but there aren't those ongoing usage objectives, which we would typically set for our own teams and our individuals, but we haven't thought about how that feeds into system, or does somebody have the system usage against their objective, for example?
Definitely.
Okay, fantastic. Right, I think that's the end of our Q&A. So it just leaves me to say thank you so much to Philippa and Paige for joining us today. I really appreciate your expertise and time. I've learnt loads, as usual. If you want more information from us or from ReThink HR, you can opt in using the exit survey at the end of this broadcast, and one of our experts or the ReThink team will be in touch with you to follow up. You can also email us at info@cipher.com at any time, and we will get back to you. The exit survey also asks for a little bit of feedback. So if you could take the time to fill that in, that would help us improve for future webinars. So thanks again, Philippa and Paige. Really appreciate your time. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We hope you found this useful and that we'll see you on another Cipher webinar again soon. Take care. Goodbye.